The question is, what's the problem with Israel's explanations to the world? What's interesting, you know the old cliche, 2 Jews, 3 synagogues, 4 political opinions, 5 parties. If you go to the United States, you will find that every Jew in America agrees on one thing. Israel has terrible hasbara. And the media is biased. There are a couple of things. Again, it sort of goes to my longer talk about media bias. First of all, there is a double standard. There's a double standard in the world, the way Israel is treated and the way everybody else is. You know, the United States is sending drones into Sudan and Yemen, and will kill terrorists and maybe 20 innocent bystanders, and nobody in the United States cares, nobody anywhere else cares. You do the same thing, like just happened, bombing in Gaza, totally different story. There's a double standard. Now, a lot of people kvetch about it. They say, hey, there shouldn't be a double standard. Too bad. You're not going to change the double standard. So your goal in communications should be not to change the double standard, not to try to argue with people that there's a double standard, because it's futile. You're not going to change it. Your job is to say, there is a double standard. Given the double standard, how can I best make the case for Israel? That's one thing. Secondly, I would argue, I argue with people in the United States, I'm actually sort of happy that there's a double standard. Because what is the double standard partly based on? It's based on the fact that Israel's a democracy. I mean, you can say anything you want in Israel about Israel. And I tell people, you don't have to watch CNN. You don't have to read The Guardian. If you want to read criticism of Israel, pick up Haaretz, right? So you can criticize Israel. But up until 3 weeks ago, when did you ever read anything about Syria in the United States? I mean, you never see Wolf Blitzer or Katie Couric or Brian Williams or any of the news people reporting live from Cairo, Egypt, or Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, or Damascus, Syria. It doesn't happen. So lots of things, lots of news comes out of Israel. You don't get the news from the Arab countries. So most news is negative. Most news then about Israel is going to be negative. You also are in a asymmetric warfare. So every time you use an F-15 against a bunch of guys with mortars or rocks, or a kid with a rock is in a picture with a tank, that's going to be on the front page of every newspaper in the United States. And it doesn't matter if you can explain why it is that the tank is there and that the kid is there with a rock, or maybe behind the kid with the rock is a person with an anti-tank missile. It doesn't matter, because that picture is so compelling, it's going to be in the paper. So you have to recognize that you're dealing in asymmetric public diplomacy, just like you're dealing in asymmetric warfare, and you have to adapt your public diplomacy to do it. You have to do what I call wargaming public diplomacy. That is, somewhere in the MOD, someone is sitting there thinking, what happens if the Muslim Brotherhood takes over Egypt? What do we do? What happens if we decide to launch an attack on Iran? What are we going to do? What if, what if, what if? Same in the US. We're thinking, what if China attacks Taiwan? What if this happens? What if? You have to do the same thing with public diplomacy. You have to think in advance. 6 months from now, what's going to happen in Israel? How do we explain now what might happen in 6 months? For example, I had a list of the 10 things that could happen 3 years ago that I was presenting to people in the United States. Number 1 on my list 3 years ago was Israel goes back into Gaza. We had to prepare to explain why might Israel go into Gaza, so that if it happened, people would understand. Now, what if Israel attacks Iran? Have we prepared the world to understand why you might do it? I said, 3 years ago, I said, what if Mubarak falls and the peace treaty is canceled? What if you should be thinking, what could happen here in Israel in 6 months? What's likely to happen? How do I explain that to the media now? How do I explain it to people so they'll understand it? And then just if you want, I'll give you the other quick lesson I give students in the United States. I have what I call it the PEER program, P-E-E-R, the acronym. P stands for peace. When you talk in public diplomacy with non-Israelis, especially, every other word out of your mouth should be peace. Peace, 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 peace. Everything should be explained in terms of peace. Israel is building a security fence in order to create greater peace between Israel and the Palestinians, reduce the threat of terror so that there can be negotiations. Bibi Netanyahu had a 10-month freeze on settlements in the hope of bringing the Palestinians back to the negotiating table. Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in the hope of ending the terror and creating the conditions to have peace negotiations. Peace, peace, peace. Because we know that in a debate, whichever side looks like they're most for peace wins. And too often, the pro-Israel side doesn't look like it's the one for peace. We're the ones with excuses, alibis, explanations. Secondly, when you talk about peace, you have to do it simply. Why are the Palestinians seen as so effective in the media? Well, I can tell you, the Palestinians have a 3-word answer for every question. You know what it is? Exactly. End the occupation. You ask a Palestinian, what day of the week is it? End the occupation, then I'll tell you. Ah, that's a lovely red dress you're wearing. Yeah, red from the martyrs of the occupation. It's a great answer, because who's for occupation? I'm not. And 3 words explains it all. Now, if you ask some Israeli diplomat, how do we end this Palestinian-Israeli conflict? And they'll say, well, let me tell you. First, you have to go back to 1917 in the Balfour Declaration, and then in 1937 was the Peel Plan, followed, of course, by the 47th. You know, we can give a history lesson. It doesn't work. Okay, second, E in PEER. E is for empathy. Too often, we present the Palestinians as they're all terrorists, they're all this, they're all that. We are trying to demonize the other side. For years, Israeli Hasbara was all about what was wrong with the Palestinians, what's wrong with the Arabs. And it doesn't play well with other audiences because most people don't accept the idea that all Palestinians are terrorists or all Muslims are terrorists or that it's only the Palestinians' fault. So you have to show some empathy for the other side and say, yes, acknowledge. They have a position, they have a point. Some of their positions are correct. Some of the things that Israel does aren't all right. But then to try to turn it around to say, yes, those things are true, but here's some other information you should have. Third, you should use emotion. Israel's reluctant to do this. What do the Palestinians do every time there's an attack anywhere? What do you see on TV? Crying Palestinian mothers. You see children in hospitals. What do you do when there's a terrorist attack here? You don't want to show it. You show the bus that's burned up. You don't show the bodies. I'm not saying necessarily you should, but you need to be explained in a more emotional way. For example, when you say 10,000 rockets have been fired from Gaza into southern Israel, it's abstract. It's like 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. It's not the same as telling a story. You know, I say 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, count down to 1, and you say this is how long an Israeli has from the time the code red alarm goes off to find a shelter from a missile. Imagine trying to take your elderly parent to a shelter in 15 seconds or taking your disabled child. You know, make it real, make it more emotional for people, and it will have a much bigger impact than abstract history, abstract statistics. Finally, the last thing in PEER is R, for rhetorical question. People don't appreciate how difficult your dilemmas are. What do you do with Gilad Shalit? What's the dilemma? It's an incredible dilemma you face about whether to trade or not. People don't appreciate the kind of dilemmas. What do you do when they're firing rockets from Gaza? So ask them, what would you do? What would you do if you were facing the same kind of situation? If your neighbor was firing a shotgun into your house every day, and maybe it never hit anybody. Yeah, you know, those rockets from Gaza, they never kill anybody. Yeah, so, see, if somebody shoots a shotgun through your window, it never actually hits anybody. Would you do nothing, or would you do something? Present present them with the dilemmas you face in a way that they can understand, and you will be able to have a much more, I think, more influence on them. That's the short version. I hope, if nothing else, you remember the issue about peace, 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 peace. That's the most important thing I said today. And thank you all for coming.